Okay, so this is chapter 3 on biological macromolecules, and this is part 1. Let me just move my camera here. Okay, so in this chapter we're going to focus on organic biological macromolecules. And I've broken this chapter up into 5 parts just to make it a little bit more manageable. So aside from water, living things are going to be composed mostly of carbon-based organic compounds. And there's 4 classes of organic biologically relevant macromolecules that we're going to talk about. And those are carbohydrates. And up here I have a picture of a simple sugar. This is glucose. That is classified as a carbohydrate. And then there are lipids. And shown here is the phospholipid bilayer. It's actually in this picture too, right here. These are phospholipids. We'll talk about those when we get into lipids. And then proteins, so also in this figure, this purple channel protein here sitting in the membrane is an example of a transport protein. And lastly are nucleic acids. And so this is a double-stranded DNA helix here, and that's an example of a nucleic acid. And so again, we're going to talk about all 4 groups. But before we jump into those, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to all 4 and then talk about how they're made. So carbohydrates will be our first group, and carbohydrates are going to be the primary source of energy for living organisms. Carbohydrates can be simple or complex. If they are complex, they get broken down into simple carbohydrates. And so glucose is our example here of a simple carbohydrate that will be an energy source for all living things. And in fact, when we get to the chapter on cellular respiration, we are going to focus on glucose metabolism. And glucose is going to be broken down in that process of cellular respiration to yield ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is the energy currency that our cells and the cells of all living organisms can use to drive energy requiring processes. Okay. Cellular respiration can use other types of fuel, but glucose, especially for the brain, is going to be the preferred source, the preferred fuel source. So examples of foods that are rich in carbohydrates, that includes grains, and I would say whole grains would be the healthy choice. Breads, so actually I should say whole grain breads are a good choice, pasta, and then probably the best source of carbohydrates would be fruits and vegetables. Fruits, vegetables, and complex carbohydrates would be the best. There we go. Our second group of biologically relevant macromolecules are lipids. And so when we think about lipids, lipids have a couple of different roles in our body. The first is lipids can be used for energy. In fact, they yield more ATP than glucose, and so they're a great source of energy. Lipids tend to be a long-term energy storage model, and so our molecules. So our bodies tend to take excess fats, lipids, and we'll talk about this more in one of the next sections. They tend to take excess and store it in adipose tissue, which is fat tissue. So we can store energy long-term in lipids. Lipids are also great for insulation, so they create a thermal barrier to maintain body temperature. They're also components of cell membranes. Okay, foods rich in lipids include oils and butters and avocados, nuts, seeds, and fatty fish. Okay, again, this is just an overview. We're going to go into the specifics of each in the separate parts of the chapter. So proteins, diverse functions, here are just 2. Proteins can be enzymes, and proteins can be involved in transport. Foods rich in proteins include meat, fish, eggs, dairy products, legumes, tofu, and other soy products. And our last macromolecule is nucleic acids. And so we have 2 types of nucleic acids. We have DNA, which is shown here in this picture on the left. Here's my pointer. Okay, so deoxyribonucleic acid. And then over here on the right is RNA, which is ribonucleic acid. Those are our 2 types of nucleic acids. And there really aren't any foods that contain DNA and RNA in specific, significant amounts. So we don't really get nucleic acids from our diet. Instead, our cells will synthesize these molecules. Okay. And so how are these molecules built and taken apart? So we're going to go through those two processes. So proteins, carbohydrates, and nucleic acids, not lipids, are all what we call polymers. So they're built from monomeric subunits. And again, we're going to go over this when we get into the parts of the chapter on this, but just as a heads up, when we talk about carbohydrates, the subunits that make up carbohydrates are simple sugars. The subunits that make up proteins are called amino acids. And the subunits that make up nucleic acids are called nucleotides. Okay, so lipids are the only class that are not classified as polymers. They don't have monomeric subunits. Instead, lipids are composed of fatty acids and glycerol. And there are other components to lipids as well. And again, when we get to that part of the chapter, we'll talk about it. But no matter which biological macromolecule, organic macromolecule we're talking about, they're all put together by dehydration synthesis. So again, this is building larger molecules from smaller ones. Okay, so putting pieces together to form the large macromolecule. So again, it's called dehydration synthesis. This can also be referred to as a condensation reaction. It's pretty much the same thing. And so what happens here? So dehydration, let's pick apart the word, dehydration synthesis. So literally the synthesis means building, right? So we're building a larger molecule. And the dehydration part of it means we're removing water in the process. Okay, so if we look at this figure here, at the top we have subunits 1, 2, and 3, whatever those are, part of this macromolecule, and we want to add the 4th subunit here, the 4th amino acid if we're building a protein, let's say. So what we're going to do is we're going to put these together. There we go, we just built a larger molecule, so there's the synthesis. But as we did that, we removed a hydroxyl group, right, from subunit 4, and a hydroxyl group, or not a hydroxyl group, a hydrogen group from subunit 3. So a hydroxyl and a hydrogen. So we pulled off H2O. So we removed water and we built a larger molecule. So again, that's dehydration synthesis. This is, we'll see in a couple of chapters, this is called an anabolic reaction. It's a build-up reaction. And that's going to require energy. And so you can see here on my list, I tell you that ATP is required for this process. And lastly, all metabolic processes, whether we're building stuff up or taking them down, they're going to be catalyzed by enzymes. And so enzymes in our body will control all of these processes that are occurring. So here is an example. Okay, so here I have 2 monomers or 2 subunits. So 1 here plus 1 here. These are 2 monomers of glucose. Okay, they're going to come together, and what's going to happen is, you can see in red here. Oh, actually, this is labeled wrong. This figure's wrong. So it's supposed to be in red, but it's going to be, where's my pointer? This hydroxyl group and this hydrogen, not that one, this hydrogen being taken off, and these are going to be linked together. Okay, so you can see again here subunit 1, this was subunit 2, and they're going to be linked together through this oxygen. And water here shown in red has been removed. And again, this is going to be catalyzed by enzymes. We're synthesizing a larger molecule. So this is again dehydration synthesis. Water is removed and a larger molecule is formed. In this case, so again, these glucose monomers were called monosaccharides. And now we have those 2 together, and this is called a disaccharide. And specifically, this disaccharide is called maltose. Okay, you'll notice that sugars, we can call them saccharides, so carbohydrates, monosaccharides and disaccharides are going to end in OSE. So you've got glucose, you've got maltose, we'll see lactose, we'll see sucrose. Okay, so OSE tells you that that's a sugar. Okay, the opposite of dehydration synthesis is called hydrolysis, okay, or hydrolysis. So adding water and splitting a molecule. And so this is how molecules are broken down, okay? We're going to learn that this is a catabolic process, and it's going to release energy, okay? And of course, it's going to be catalyzed by enzymes. So there's enzymes that are going to regulate this reaction. And so here we go, the same generic molecule that we saw before, made up of monomers 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're going to remove monomer 4. And to do that, we're going to put water in. We're going to break this bond right here. Okay, that's shown here. Now we have this molecule of 1, 2, and 3, and monomer 4 is by itself. So we put water in, we broke a bond. Now the energy that was in this bond will be released. So there will be ATP released from this reaction. Okay. Okay, last slide is just a real example of this. So back to maltose. So again, maltose here was our disaccharide. If we add water in, we're going to break this bond right here. Okay, when we break that bond, we add the hydroxyl group to this carbon right here, which would be carbon 1, and we add the hydrogen here to this oxygen, which is over here on carbon 4. So carbon 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so carbon 4 would end up with that hydrogen. Okay, so again, water had to be put in, a bond is broken, so energy is released, and of course this is catalyzed by enzymes. Okay, so that concludes part 1 of the chapter. In the next part, part 2, we'll be talking about carbohydrates.